Hi, Ben. This is a little bit off topic, but it's very important. My name is Cameron Lilly. I'm a student at the University of Central Florida, and recently UCF suspended me for making a joke about illegal immigration on Facebook. It was an April Fool's joke, and they are now also currently pushing for my expulsion. On top of that, a radical feminist on Twitter doxed me and instructed her 80,000 plus followers to attack me and, quote, destroy my life. And believe me, they have. Almost instantly, I received hundreds of death threats, which I'm still receiving today, and even after deleting all forms of social media, and the attacks have continued since April 1st. I was illegally evicted from my apartment and wasn't able to safely attend classes for weeks. As a result, my GPA dropped sharply, making transferring out almost impossible. On top of that, UCF had me arrested, framing me with cybercrime and eavesdropping. Not even kidding. I'm now over $15,000 in debt from lawyers, and I may never be able to go to college again. It's the first time I've been in debt in my entire life. I'm proud of that. I also lost almost all my friends who don't want to be at risk for being attacked or suspended from the school. My questions are, what would you recommend for me to do to handle my current situation and other people in this situation? Because believe me, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
And how do we as conservative-leaning college students continue to enjoy the use of free speech, which, even though it is our right, we still risk, having our lives literally destroyed and attacked, even though it is our right to, speak freely?
Yes, I mean, first of all, it's hard for me to speak to the situation because, while I believe everything that you're saying, I don't know what the original content of the post was. I don't know, what the college's policies are and what the legal stance is. So from putting on my lawyer hat, I don't know what the legal fight here is.
Just so you know, it didn't violate any school policy with a post.
Okay, so, I mean, number one, I think that there are probably a number of places that would help you pay your legal bills and who fight on this, right? Like FIRE is one of those groups. I'm sure that YAF can direct you to people who fight legal fights on behalf of people like you who are being discriminated against by colleges if your account is accurate. So that's where you have to start. I mean, once you've obtained your legal rights, then I think we can start talking about how to reapply to particular colleges, how to get redress from the university. But this seems to me more of a legal problem, on a broader social, in sort of a broader social sphere, because, again, I'm not your lawyer and I don't know your case very well. What I would say is that obviously being doxxed is, as far as I'm aware, a legal issue. So you might have a legal case there. And also, colleges are incredibly overzealous about enforcing anything that they perceive to be violating politically correct standards. But there are ways to fight back in the media. So I would recommend that you send us your information so we can take a look at it. I mean, I do run a website with 100 million page views a month. I would, I would suggest that. If it's as egregious as you sound, I think that there will be people who come to your defense if you're able to get that material out there. But talk to your lawyers first, because obviously you don't want to jeopardize any legal case that you have. And you should also talk to some of the 501c3 groups that actually spend their lives defending against these kinds of things.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So you haven't committed a crime. You're not on welfare. You're not on food stamps. You're not living on the streets, right? You have a job. You're trying to hold down the job. You've gone to college. You've served in the military, right? It's an obvious example. So I think there are certain criteria that are pretty objective that we could use on that score. Sure. Hey, how are you? Sure.
So, as you're probably aware, the genitals and the brain form in separate stages, and based on the amount of hormones, which is usually triggered by the hormones that are produced to the genitals, is either male or female.
Right.
And whether or not that is also, since the brain is in a separate phase, it's possible that hormones may influence that, but it's also possible that it may not be. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, there's been some studies like where they injected biological rats with testosterone in the brain, and just during the brain stage, and these rats, it's hard to tell if they're transgender, but
right.
At least lesbians on the transgender.
Okay.
So there's some indication of hormones being influenced there. So my question for you is, if hypothetically you had hypothetically you had a male brain that was put in a female body, what pronouns would you use for the person?
So first of all, I think that we'd have to have better science determining what constitutes a quote-unquote female brain versus a male brain, because brain science is really underdeveloped in this particular area. But assuming in the future that they come up with a strict definition, which I think is rather unlikely. But let's assume you're hypothetical, because it's a fun hypothetical. So they somehow create a brain swapping mechanism, and Kylie Jenner's brain ends up in Caitlyn Jenner's body, right? Okay, or body 3 years ago. So that's the hypothetical. So the answer there is that I think that a more technical definition would probably be that the person is intersex, because now you're looking at a person who has a biological basis for their intersex behavior, right? They have genitals of one type, and they have a biology that dictates that their brain is functioning in another way. But to suggest that they are a full-fledged woman is not the case, because chromosomes still determine how your sex develops. The strict biological definition is strictly chromosomal based. I mean, if you talk to a doctor or a scientist and you say, is this person male or female, they'll give you a blood test, they'll look at your chromosomes, and they will say this person is male or female. If you're talking about something else, then you could be talking about somebody who's intersex. The argument that it seems to me a lot of transgender folks are making is not that they actually have to demonstrate anything objectively verifiable in order to claim transgenderism. And this is where you run into some problems. Barack Obama has been terrible from beginning to end. He's divided us along racial and sexual lines. He's divided us along every line he could find. He came in with a great promise. Because the expectations for Obama were so high and he fell so short, he's really divided America. I think he's trolled the Republican Party into irrelevance, and I think that he's taken his own party to Bernie Sanders land. And I think that, he's done that through policy, but he's mostly done that through his style. When Obama was elected, there was this great hope that he was finally going to help conciliate the greatest conflict that has ever torn the nation, the racial conflict, right? And instead he came in on the basis and governed on the basis that if you oppose him, it must be because you are black. And if there are imbalances in terms of equality, that is inequity, right? Inequality equals inequity. So if more black people than white people are going to prison proportionately, that must be because people are racist. It can't just be because too many black people are committing crimes, right? So by doing that, he's divided people along these lines. And it's you can see it in the Gallup polls. I mean, people now feel that the racial conflict in the country is at heights it hasn't been for decades. That to me is the most damaging thing, is that he's reverted American politics to a form of tribalism that I find very scary. In terms of his actual policy, Obamacare is destroying the medical system. It's raising premiums for people who are in the system. It's going to end up with an actual form of care that really is just redistribution of care. Which is going to hurt the people who are youngest and the people who are oldest. There's a reason Ezekiel Emanuel, who designed his Obamacare program, says he wants to die at 75. They're going to end up redistributing health care, and they're going to end up restricting it. As far as the economy, his economic policies, if you look at American history, every time there's a big bust, there is then a similarly sized boom, unless you have a massive government policy like FDR and Hoover, or unless you have a massive government policy like Barack Obama. So on domestic policy, he's been terrible. He's pushed government into realms it never was before and created conflicts that weren't there before. So, for example, on the gay marriage issue, my position on this has been that the government should get completely out of the business of marriage. I think the government sucks at everything, and they suck at that too. So, what Obama has done instead is he said, okay, let's enshrine same-sex marriage for the purpose of cramming down on religious institutions the idea that they must participate in something they believe is sinful. That's not live and let live. That's live like me or I won't let you live. Right? And that's dastardly stuff. When it comes to his foreign policy is the worst of all of his policies. He set the world, I mean, it's cliche at this point, but he set the world on fire. His Libya war was a disaster and handed guns to terrorists. He talks about handing guns to ISIS. He actually did that in Libya. He talks about, Syria is a disaster area. The attempt to make Iran into a regional power with the assumption that they're going to moderate themselves is utter asininity. It's just foolishness on an unbelievable scale. His handing over of power to Russia in Crimea is going to end with NATO possibly breaking apart, because Russia's just going to continue encroaching on outlying portions of the NATO alliance and basically say, fine, come and get me, coppers. And he's allowed the Chinese to expand their realm of influence into the South China Sea, and you're going to see increasing Chinese intransigence and aggressiveness, because China demographically this happens with every country where you have a lot more males than females. China demographically, there are 125 males for every 100 females. When you have a lot of excess young men, there's only one thing you can do with those people, and that's put them in the army. And that's basically what China has done. So they're going to get very aggressive on the world stage very quickly. So every aspect, Latin America, of course, has become a disaster too. Every aspect of this presidency has been terrible, but when you have the media on your side, and when you're a likable fellow, and he is
likable on camera, then those are assets that matter. And this is why when people say, how could we end up with a reality TV show host like Trump running? He's the second one to do it. Right? Obama's the first. You don't do interviews with the lady who sat in a bathtub full of Cheerios and Fruit Loops, and then tell me about how terrible it is that Donald Trump used to be on The Apprentice.